Dust swirled across the New Mexico territory as Sarah Matthews stood defiantly on her porch, rifle steady in calloused hands. 3 prized horses grazed behind her, the last valuable possessions on her struggling ranch. The tall Apache warrior before her remained unmoved by her threats. Swift Arrow had come to collect a debt her father had promised his tribe years ago. "Your father gave his word," he said simply. Sarah's jaw tightened. She couldn't surrender those horses. They were her final chance to save everything. As tension stretched between them, something unexpected flickered in Swift Arrow's dark eyes: respect. Would this warrior who came to take everything become the very reason she survived? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Sarah Matthews watched the Apache warrior ride away, his silhouette dissolving into the afternoon heat. Only when he disappeared did she lower her Winchester rifle, her knuckles white from gripping it so tightly. She turned to look at the 3 horses grazing in the nearby corral: Midnight, a stallion black as coal; Willow, a dappled gray mare; and Tempest, a chestnut with a lightning streak down his face. They were more than animals to her. They were her last hope. The yellowing land deed hung framed inside the ranch house, a bitter reminder of everything she fought to keep. Sarah ran her fingers over the glass, tracing her father's name. 8 months since his passing, and the weight of his absence still pressed on her chest like a boulder. "You left me with more than I can handle, Pa," she whispered. The ranch had been struggling even before James Matthews took his final breath. The drought had withered their crops, cattle prices had plummeted, and the bank's patience had worn thin. The 3 prized horses, with their impeccable bloodlines, were her final chance to raise enough money to clear the most pressing debts. Sarah moved to the kitchen and pumped water into a basin. She scrubbed her face, washing away trail dust and frustration. The Apache had spoken of a debt, 3 horses promised in some long-forgotten trade. Her father had never mentioned any deal with the tribes. But then, James Matthews had kept many secrets in his final years. A memory surfaced, her father returning from a trading expedition 3 years ago, feverish with an arrow wound in his shoulder. He'd never explained how he'd survived when 2 of his companions hadn't. Had there been some arrangement? Some promise made in desperation? Sarah kneaded dough for the evening bread with unnecessary force. The Apache, Swift Arrow, he'd called himself, had seemed certain. His eyes held no deception, only determination. He would return, she was sure of it. The distant dinner bell from the Henderson ranch reminded her how alone she was. Other women her age were wives and mothers. At 26, Sarah remained unmarried, her youth withering like the land around her. Not that she'd had much choice. Someone had to care for her father during his long illness. Someone had to learn how to manage ledgers, mend fences, and haggle with merchants. A floorboard creaked under her boot as she crossed to check her father's old rifle. She'd need to clean it properly tonight. The Apache's promise hung in the air: "I will return for what is owed." Through the window, she could see Mr. Peterson and his sons riding the boundary of their adjoining property. They'd offered to buy her land 3 times now, each offer lower than the last. They were waiting for her to fail, for the bank to force her hand. "Not yet," she muttered, reaching for her hat. "Not ever, if I can help it." Outside, Sarah checked the horses one by one. Midnight nuzzled her palm, sensing her distress. These animals were her inheritance, her livelihood, and perhaps her only friends in this unforgiving territory. Their sale could keep the ranch afloat for another year, time enough to make something of the place, to prove everyone wrong about a woman's capability to run a ranch alone. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, Sarah sat on the porch steps, her father's journal open in her lap. She flipped through the pages, searching for any mention of an agreement with the Apache tribes. Nothing. Another secret he'd taken to his grave. The last entry, dated just days before his death, gave her pause. Some debts can never be repaid with gold. Some promises must be kept, no matter the cost. Sarah will understand someday. She closed the journal with a snap. What had her father done? What bargain had he struck? And how would she keep both her horses and her land when Swift Arrow returned to collect? The setting sun cast long shadows across the yard. Sarah squared her shoulders. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight she would prepare. No Apache warrior, no matter how determined, would take the last of what she had. Swift Arrow dismounted his paint horse at the edge of the Apache camp, the scent of cooking fires reaching him before the sounds of his people. Children stopped their play to watch his return, their eyes questioning. He had left to retrieve 3 horses but returned with none. He touched the medicine pouch hanging at his chest, a small leather sack containing an eagle feather, a smooth river stone, and a lock of his mother's hair. The pouch had been with him through battles, hunts, and vision quests. Now, it seemed to weigh heavier against his heart. You return empty-handed. The voice belonged to Chief Running Wolf, who emerged from his dwelling, face lined with wisdom and concern. Swift Arrow nodded once. The daughter of Matthews does not honor her father's debt. She claims no knowledge of his promise. Running Wolf's expression remained unchanged, but disappointment shadowed his eyes. These are difficult times. Our people needed those horses. The tribe had suffered greatly in recent seasons. Disease had thinned their herds, and increasing conflicts with white settlers had forced them to move their hunting grounds farther from traditional territories. The 3 horses promised by James Matthews, strong, fast breeding stock, could have helped rebuild what they had lost. I will return tomorrow, Swift Arrow said. She will not refuse again. Inside his own lodge, Swift Arrow removed his weapons and sat cross-legged before a small fire. His status among the tribe was respected but complicated. His father had been Apache, a respected warrior killed in a battle with Mexican soldiers. His mother had been a Mexican captive who later chose to stay with the tribe. This mixed blood made him valuable as an intermediary with the white settlers but also marked him as different. You seem troubled, brother. His younger sister, Sparrow, entered with a bowl of stew. Swift Arrow accepted the food with a nod of thanks. The white woman is stubborn. Like someone else I know, Sparrow replied with a hint of amusement. What will you do? What must be done? He stared into the flames. James Matthews saved my life 3 winters ago when renegade trappers had left me for dead. He found me, tended my wounds, and returned me to our people. In exchange, I guided him safely through our territories for his trading. When sickness took his cattle, he asked for more time before providing the horses he promised our tribe. And now he is with the ancestors, and his daughter inherits his debt, Sparrow concluded. Swift Arrow nodded. She fights to keep her land as fiercely as any warrior. There is fire in her eyes. You admire her. It wasn't a question. He didn't answer immediately. The white woman, Sarah, had stood before him without fear, despite being half his size. Most white women would have fled inside or called for help at the sight of an Apache warrior approaching their home alone. She had not. She had raised her rifle with steady hands and clear eyes. I respect her courage, he finally said. But courage does not settle debts. Later, as the camp settled into the quiet rhythms of night, Swift Arrow sought out Cloud Dancer, the tribe's elder and keeper of wisdom. The horses are needed for the tribe's survival, Cloud Dancer acknowledged when Swift Arrow had explained the situation. But consider all paths before choosing one. Sometimes the straightest trail leads to a cliff's edge. Swift Arrow pondered these words as he prepared for sleep. The woman's face appeared in his mind, her sun-browned skin, her eyes the color of the summer sky, the determination in the set of her jaw. Tomorrow he would return to the Matthews Ranch. Tomorrow he would claim what was owed, by whatever means necessary. But as sleep finally claimed him, it was not the horses he saw, but Sarah Matthews standing in the doorway of her home, a woman alone against the world, fighting with the same desperation that drove his own people. Sarah awoke to the sound of hoofbeats approaching her ranch house. Dawn had barely broken, the first golden light spilling across the floorboards. She grabbed her rifle and moved to the window, already knowing who she would find. Swift Arrow sat atop his paint horse, as still as the morning itself. Unlike yesterday, he wore no war paint, only a blue cloth band around his forehead that held back his long black hair. He carried no visible weapons, though Sarah wasn't foolish enough to believe he was unarmed. She opened the door before he could dismount. The answer is still no. I have not yet asked a question today, he replied, his English surprisingly clear and unaccented. The horses aren't for sale or trade or whatever you think my father promised. Swift Arrow dismounted in one fluid motion. I will wait until you remember the truth of your father's word. Sarah's grip tightened on her rifle. Wait all you want. The answer won't change. Then I will wait here. He gestured to the ground beside her porch. Until it does. She hadn't expected this. Threats, perhaps. An attempt to steal the horses in the night. Not this calm declaration of patience. You can't just camp on my property. Your father would have offered hospitality. There was no accusation in his tone, merely a statement of fact. Sarah felt heat rise to her cheeks. Her father would indeed have invited any visitor inside, regardless of race or purpose. James Matthews had believed in frontier courtesy, even when it wasn't returned. Fine. She stepped aside, rifle still ready. You can state your case over breakfast, then be on your way. The Apache warrior had to duck to enter the low doorway. Inside, he remained standing, his presence filling the small room. Sarah busied herself with the stove, uncomfortably aware of his eyes tracking her movements. Her father's empty chair stood at the head of the small table, the chair no one had sat in since his passing. She had taken her meals at the side chair, preserving his place as if he might return to fill it. Sit, she instructed, pointing to the chair opposite her father's. Not there, she added quickly when Swift Arrow moved toward the head chair. Understanding flickered in his dark eyes. He took the indicated seat without comment. Sarah served a simple meal, cornbread, beans, and coffee. She watched with surprise as Swift Arrow waited for her to begin eating before he touched his food. His manners were impeccable, his movements deliberate and graceful. How did you know my father? She asked finally, breaking the uncomfortable silence. He saved my life. Swift Arrow's response was matter-of-fact. 3 winters passed. Trappers left me for dead after a dispute over territory. Your father found me, tended my wounds, brought me back to health. Sarah frowned. He never mentioned this. There was much happening then. Cattle sickness. Drought. The timing matched the period when her father had returned wounded from a trading expedition. Another piece of the puzzle, but still not the full picture. And in return for saving you, he promised 3 horses? The story seemed incomplete. In return, I guided him safely through Apache territories for his trading. The horses came later, when he needed more time to settle a different debt. Sarah's spoon clattered against her bowl. What debt? That is between your father and my people. Frustration flared within her. More secrets. More obligations she hadn't known about. Whatever arrangement you had with my father died with him, she said firmly. Those horses are all that stand between me and losing this ranch. Swift Arrow studied her, his expression unreadable. Then we are both fighting for survival. When the meal ended, Sarah expected him to leave. Instead, he walked to the porch and settled on the steps, his back straight, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains. What are you doing? She demanded. I told you. I will wait. For how long? As long as necessary. Sarah slammed the door, leaning against it in frustration. Through the window, she could see his motionless form, patient as the land itself. She had work to do, fences to mend, animals to tend, a vegetable garden desperately needing attention. And now, an Apache warrior on her porch, a silent reminder of debts she hadn't known existed. 3 days passed with Swift Arrow maintaining his vigil. Each morning, Sarah would find him already awake, tending a small fire or sitting in silent meditation. Each night, he would sleep beneath the stars, refusing her grudging offers of the barn. He accepted meals but otherwise made no demands on her hospitality. On the 4th day, Sarah rode out to check the northern fence line that had been troubling her for weeks. Several posts had rotted through, leaving her cattle vulnerable to wandering. She'd barely begun examining the damage when she sensed his presence behind her. Do you intend to follow me everywhere? She asked. Without turning around. You work alone. It is not safe. Swift Arrow dismounted, surveying the broken fence with a critical eye. I've managed just fine before you arrived, Sarah muttered, pulling tools from her saddlebag. He said nothing, simply picked up a post and drove it into the ground with remarkable efficiency. Sarah watched, reluctantly impressed by his strength. When he reached for another post, she handed him the tools wordlessly. They worked side by side for hours, the fence slowly taking shape between them. The broken fence post that she'd been struggling with for weeks was now firmly in place, a visible symbol of their first cooperative effort. You know horses, Swift Arrow said suddenly, breaking their prolonged silence. The three in your corral. They are special. My father bred them, Sarah replied, wiping sweat from her brow. Started with a Spanish stallion he traded for years ago. Been improving the bloodline ever since. That is why my people need them. Strong horses. Good blood. Sarah drove a nail with unnecessary force. My people need them too. Without those horses, I lose everything. Dark clouds gathered on the horizon as they finished the fence line. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain, a rare blessing in the parched territory. Storm comes, Swift Arrow observed, glancing skyward. We should return. They rode hard, racing the approaching weather. The first fat droplets began to fall as they reached the ranch yard. By the time they'd secured the horses in the barn, the rain was coming down in sheets, drumming against the roof. The roof leaks in the northwest corner, Sarah said, eyeing the darkening clouds with concern. I need to check it before the whole thing gives way. Swift Arrow followed her gaze. I will help. The storm intensified as they worked to secure a tarp over the damaged section. Wind tore at the material, threatening to rip it from their grasp. Lightning split the sky, followed by a crack of thunder that spooked the horses below. Hold this! Sarah shouted over the din, struggling to hammer a nail through the tarp. Swift Arrow braced the material with one hand, steadying her with the other when a gust nearly knocked her off balance. Their eyes met briefly, mutual determination reflecting in the flash of lightning. When they finally climbed down, both were soaked to the skin and spattered with mud. Sarah's hands trembled from cold and exertion. Without a word, Swift Arrow gathered kindling and started a small fire in the barn's stone hearth, a feature her grandfather had insisted on building for just such emergencies. The warmth was welcome against the chill that had settled into her bones. Sarah huddled close to the flames, suddenly aware of how alone they were. Why didn't you just take the horses? She asked, watching his profile in the firelight. You could have. That first day. A theft would bring soldiers. Bring trouble to my people. He added another stick to the fire. And your father was a man of honor. His debt should be paid with honor. Even if it costs me everything? Swift Arrow turned to face her fully. You speak of losing everything. What do you think my people have lost already? The question hung between them as the storm raged outside. For the first time, Sarah found herself considering the Apache's perspective, what it meant to be pushed from ancestral lands, to watch your way of life disappear season by season. The broken fence post they'd repaired together suddenly seemed like more than just a mended boundary. It was the first breach in the wall between their worlds. A week passed, the uneasy truce between Sarah and Swift Arrow settling into a routine. He continued to sleep outdoors but worked alongside her during daylight hours, his knowledge of the land proving unexpectedly valuable. Sarah found herself wondering how she had managed alone for so long. She watched from the kitchen window as Swift Arrow exercised the 3 prized horses one morning. His connection with the animals was undeniable. Midnight, usually wary of strangers, responded to his touch with unusual trust. Willow and Tempest followed his commands as if they'd known him for years. When he returned from exercising the horses, Swift Arrow paused at the porch, removing a tribal necklace from around his neck. The piece was striking, a leather cord holding polished stones, wooden beads, and what appeared to be a small silver medallion. He studied it thoughtfully before returning it to his neck. Your horses are well trained, he said when she brought him water. Strong spirits. They're all I have left that's worth anything, Sarah replied. Not true. His dark eyes surveyed the ranch. This land has value. Your strength has value. The compliment, unexpected and direct, left her momentarily speechless. Before she could respond, the sound of approaching horses drew their attention. 3 riders approached from the direction of town, Martin Henderson and his 2 sons from the neighboring ranch. Sarah squared her shoulders. The Hendersons had made no secret of their desire to absorb her property into their expanding holdings. "Miss Matthews," Martin called, tipping his hat while eyeing Swift Arrow suspiciously. "Noticed you had company. Everything all right here?" "Everything's fine, Mr. Henderson," she replied coolly. "Word in town is you've got an Apache living on your property." His hand rested casually near his holstered pistol. "People are concerned. My arrangements are my business." Martin's elder son spat tobacco juice onto the ground. "It ain't natural, a white woman alone with a savage." Swift Arrow remained perfectly still, but Sarah noticed the slight tensing of his shoulders. "I believe I've made myself clear," she said firmly. "Good day, gentlemen." After a tense moment, the Hendersons turned their horses. "Think about my offer," Martin called over his shoulder. "Won't stay open forever." When they disappeared down the trail, Sarah exhaled slowly. "They want this land. Have for years." "How much?" Swift Arrow asked. "Half what it's worth." She rubbed her temples. "The banknote comes due in 3 months. Without selling those horses, I won't make the payment." That evening, as Sarah prepared supper, Swift Arrow entered the house and sat at the table, not in her father's chair, but in what had become his place. The rifle that usually stood by the door was in his hands. "Your weapon needs cleaning," he said, beginning to disassemble it with practiced movements. Sarah watched as his fingers worked deftly with the gun parts. "Where did you learn about rifles?" "I have fought alongside Mexicans against Comanche," he replied. "And against Mexicans with Comanche. War makes strange teachers." His candor surprised her. She'd never considered the complex politics among the native tribes and settlers. As he reassembled the weapon, Swift Arrow seemed to come to a decision. He placed the rifle on the table and met her gaze directly. "I have a proposal," he said. "I've already told you." He raised a hand. "Not about the horses. Something different." Sarah crossed her arms. "I'm listening." "Marriage," he said simply. Her shocked laugh died when she realized he was serious. "Have you lost your mind?" "It is a practical solution." He touched the tribal necklace at his throat. "You need to keep your ranch. My people need strong horses for breeding. Together we could have both." "You can't possibly." "Among my people, marriage is often an alliance between families. A combining of strengths." He removed the necklace, placing it on the table between them. "This belonged to my father. It symbolizes my position in the tribe." Sarah stared at the tribal necklace, her mind racing. "You're suggesting a marriage of convenience? To an Apache warrior?" "To a man who respects your courage and knows this land," he corrected. "The horses would stay here, but their offspring would benefit my people. Your ranch would have a protector against both bandits and men like Henderson. People in town would never accept it." "Do they accept you now?" "A woman alone." The question struck home. Since her father's death, the townspeople had gradually withdrawn, their initial sympathy hardening into judgment as she refused to sell or remarry according to their expectations. Swift Arrow stood, leaving the necklace on the table. "Consider it for 3 days. Then I will have your answer." Sleep eluded Sarah that night. Swift Arrow's proposal circled in her mind like a hawk over prey. Marriage. The word itself felt foreign on her tongue, a path she'd long ago dismissed as incompatible with her determination to save her father's ranch. At dawn, she retrieved a small wooden box from beneath her bed. Inside lay her mother's journal, its leather cover worn smooth from years of handling. Elizabeth Matthews had died when Sarah was 12, but her written words had guided her daughter through the turbulent years that followed. Sarah traced her fingers over her mother's flowing script. Elizabeth had come west as a new bride, leaving behind a comfortable life in Boston to follow James Matthews into the frontier. Their marriage had begun as a practical arrangement, her family's money paired with his frontier knowledge, but the journal chronicled how practicality had blossomed into deep affection. "I did not expect to love this man," one entry read, Yet here I stand, unable to imagine my life without him. Perhaps that is the greatest surprise of marriage, finding strength in the joining of two separate lives. Sarah closed the journal, her mother's wisdom settling into her bones. Could she follow a similar path? Not for love, certainly, but for survival? Outside, Swift Arrow had already begun the morning chores. Sarah watched through the window as he repaired a broken wheel on the wagon with quiet efficiency. In just over a week, he had identified and addressed problems around the ranch that would have taken her months to complete alone. Midday brought an unexpected visitor. Thomas Burke, the banker's son, rode up with his usual air of entitlement. Sarah met him on the porch, conscious of Swift Arrow watching from the corral. "Miss Matthews," Burke removed his hat with a flourish. "You're looking well." "What brings you here, Mr. Burke?" Sarah kept her tone neutral. Thomas had been pursuing her with increasing persistence since her father's death. "Concern for your welfare." His gaze drifted meaningfully toward Swift Arrow. "There's talk in town about your guest." "Is there?" "It's not proper, Sarah." His use of her first name grated on her nerves. "A woman alone with a savage. Think of your reputation." "My reputation is not your concern." Thomas stepped closer, lowering his voice. "My father could extend your loan. Make things easier for you." His hand brushed her arm. "If we had an understanding." Sarah stepped back. "I believe I understand you perfectly, Mr. Burke." His expression hardened. "Don't be foolish. A woman can't run a ranch alone. You need a husband." "Perhaps I do," she replied evenly. "But I'll choose him myself." After Burke departed, his offer hanging in the air like a storm cloud, Sarah walked to the corral where her 3 prized horses grazed. She leaned against the fence, seeking counsel from the only friends she had left. "What would you do?" she whispered to Midnight, who nudged her palm affectionately. That evening, Sarah took her mother's journal to the creek that ran along the eastern edge of her property. The spot had been her sanctuary since childhood. As twilight settled over the land, she weighed her impossible choice. Pride told her to refuse Swift Arrow's offer, to struggle on alone, as she had been doing. But pride wouldn't pay the banknote. Pride wouldn't protect her from men like Burke or Henderson. And pride made for cold company on winter nights. Practicality suggested that Swift Arrow's proposal had merit. A marriage of convenience. An alliance of mutual benefit. Her horses would remain on her land, while their offspring would help his people. The ranch would have a strong defender. And she would have, what? A husband in name only? A stranger in her home? The last light faded from the sky as Sarah closed her mother's journal. Elizabeth Matthews had traveled west with a man she barely knew, building a life from duty that eventually grew into love. Could Sarah do the same? Not for love, but for survival? As she walked back to the ranch house, her decision crystallized with each step. Swift Arrow stood on the porch, his tall figure silhouetted against the lamplight within. He had kept his distance these past days, giving her space to consider his proposal. "I've made my decision," she said, climbing the steps to stand before him. Swift Arrow's expression remained unreadable, but his eyes held a question. Sarah took a deep breath. "I have conditions." The next morning, Sarah spread a piece of paper on the kitchen table. Swift Arrow sat across from her, his posture straight, eyes attentive as she dipped her pen in ink. "If we're to do this," she said, "we'll have a proper agreement. Written down." He nodded once, neither surprised nor offended by her businesslike approach. "First," Sarah began, writing in her neat script, "this is a partnership, not ownership. The ranch remains in my name." "Agreed." "Second, the horses stay here, but their offspring will be shared. Half remain with the ranch, half go to your people." Swift Arrow considered this. "Fair terms." "Third," she continued, her pen hesitating briefly, "this arrangement is for mutual benefit only." "It's not." She felt heat rise to her cheeks. "It's not a true marriage in all respects." His expression remained unchanged. "Among my people, marriage begins with respect. Other things may follow or not." Sarah nodded, relieved by his understanding. "Fourth, you will teach me about your people's ways, as I will teach you about running this ranch." We learn from each other. This is wise, he agreed. And finally, she wrote the last condition carefully, either of us may end this arrangement after 1 year if it doesn't serve its purpose. Swift Arrow studied the handwritten contract, this unusual marriage agreement they were drafting together. You have thought carefully about this. I don't enter into bargains lightly, Sarah replied. Nor do I. He reached for the pen. I would add one condition. Sarah raised an eyebrow. Which is? Trust, he said simply. We must begin with trust or nothing else matters. After a moment's consideration, Sarah added his condition to the paper. When the ink had dried, they both signed the document, her signature flowing and practiced from years of keeping the ranch ledgers, his carefully formed letters showing he was no stranger to the written word. How do your people marry? Sarah asked, folding the paper carefully. With a ceremony before the tribe. The joining of 2 lives is witnessed by all. And in town, we'd need a preacher, Sarah mused. People won't recognize our marriage otherwise. Swift Arrow's eyes held a glint of understanding. You worry what others will think. I worry about the practical aspects, she corrected. Without legal recognition, this arrangement doesn't protect the ranch as it should. They agreed to speak with the reservation missionary the following day, then visit the town preacher. Neither would be an ideal solution, but together they might satisfy both worlds. That evening, Swift Arrow taught Sarah about Apache marriage customs as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. The bride and groom stand on a blanket, facing east, he explained. They share food and water, showing they will provide for each other. They walk in the 4 sacred directions, showing their lives are now joined in all ways. Sarah listened, finding unexpected beauty in the simplicity of the ritual. My parents married in a Boston church, she shared. My mother wore a white dress with lace that had belonged to her grandmother. Your traditions honor your ancestors, Swift Arrow observed. As do ours. As darkness fell, an owl called from a nearby tree. Swift Arrow grew silent, listening to the night sounds with practiced attention. What is it? Sarah asked. Someone approaches, he said, rising fluidly to his feet. Moments later, Sarah heard the distant hoofbeats. 2 riders appeared in the moonlight, Henderson's sons, their horses lathered from hard riding. Evening, Miss Matthews, the elder son called, his words slightly slurred. Thought we'd pay a neighborly visit. Sarah reached for the rifle propped against the wall, but Swift Arrow's hand gently stopped her. I will speak with them, he said quietly. The visitors' intentions were clear in their drunken swagger as they dismounted. They had come to intimidate, perhaps worse. Sarah had heard stories of accidents befalling stubborn homesteaders who refused to sell. This is private property, Swift Arrow stated, his voice carrying easily through the night air. Return tomorrow if you wish to speak with us. The younger Henderson laughed. Us? You hear that, brother? The Injun thinks he belongs here. Swift Arrow remained unmoved. Leave now. Peacefully. The confrontation balanced on a knife's edge. Sarah stepped forward to stand beside Swift Arrow, their shoulders nearly touching. You heard my husband, she said clearly. Return tomorrow when you're sober. The word, husband, hung in the air, surprising even her with its weight and implication. The Henderson boys exchanged glances, their bravado faltering in the face of this unexpected alliance. After a tense moment, they remounted their horses. Your pa would be ashamed, the elder one spat before they rode away. When they had gone, Sarah released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Swift Arrow turned to her, a question in his eyes. It seems, she said, we've just announced our engagement. Dawn broke over the eastern hills as Sarah and Swift Arrow prepared to leave for the Apache encampment. She wore her best dress, a faded blue cotton that had once belonged to her mother. Swift Arrow had donned ceremonial attire, a buckskin shirt adorned with intricate beadwork, his hair tied back with leather cords woven with small silver beads. Your people may not welcome me, Sarah said as she saddled her mare. They will respect our decision, Swift Arrow replied, though something in his tone suggested uncertainty. They rode side by side across terrain that grew increasingly unfamiliar to Sarah. By midday, they reached a hidden valley where the Apache had established their temporary settlement. Children stopped their play to stare at the white woman, their curious eyes following her every movement. Cloud Dancer, the tribal elder, emerged from his dwelling to greet them. His weathered face revealed nothing as Swift Arrow explained their purpose in the Apache language. Sarah stood tall under the scrutiny of the gathering crowd, conscious of being an outsider in every possible way. "The elder wishes to speak with you alone," Swift Arrow translated after a lengthy exchange. Inside Cloud Dancer's lodge, Sarah sat cross-legged on a woven mat, fighting the urge to fidget under the elder's penetrating gaze. "You take one of our strongest warriors," Cloud Dancer said in halting English, surprising her. "Why should we accept this?" Sarah considered her answer carefully. "I'm not taking him from you. Our arrangement ensures his people will receive the horses they need. It's an alliance, not a theft." The old man's eyes narrowed. "Marriage is sacred, not a trade for horses." "Among my people too," Sarah replied. "My father taught me that a person's word is their bond. Swift Arrow says my father promised these horses. I cannot give them now without losing everything. This solution honors my father's promise while protecting what he built." Cloud Dancer was silent for a long moment. Finally, he nodded once. "You speak with an honest tongue. But remember this, when you take a warrior into your lodge, you take his spirit as well. This is not a thing to be done lightly." The ceremony took place as the sun began its descent. Sarah and Swift Arrow stood upon a beautifully woven wedding blanket, its patterns telling stories Sarah couldn't read but somehow felt in her bones. The tribe gathered in a circle around them, their faces solemn. Cloud Dancer presented them with a small clay pot of water and a wooden bowl of cornmeal. Swift Arrow drank first, then offered the water to Sarah. She drank, the ritual suddenly feeling far more significant than the practical arrangement they had discussed. "Water sustains life," Swift Arrow explained quietly. "By sharing it, we promise to sustain each other." They each took a handful of the cornmeal, symbolizing the promise to provide food and care. Then, with Cloud Dancer leading them, they walked slowly in the four sacred directions: east for the dawn of their new life, south for the warmth of their home, west for the journey they would travel together, and north for the wisdom they would need. As the ceremony concluded, an older woman approached with something in her hands, the wedding blanket upon which they had stood. She presented it to Sarah with a dignified nod. "My mother offers this as a gift," Swift Arrow translated. "It is tradition for the couple to keep the blanket that joins their paths." Sarah accepted the blanket with genuine gratitude, running her fingers over the intricate patterns. This unexpected gift, this physical symbol of their union, moved her more than she cared to admit. The journey back to town the following day was tense with anticipation. The local preacher, Reverend Wilson, had always viewed Sarah's father with suspicion for his friendly dealings with the native tribes. His reaction to their request was predictably cold. "You wish me to perform a Christian ceremony for this arrangement?" His gaze slid over Swift Arrow as if he were invisible. "We wish to be legally married according to territorial law," Sarah replied firmly. "It's unnatural," the preacher muttered. "Against God's order of things." "Is it God's order that I lose my father's land?" Sarah challenged. "That I be forced to accept charity or worse from men like Thomas Burke?" After much debate and the discreet passing of a significant donation to the church building fund, Reverend Wilson reluctantly agreed to perform a brief civil ceremony the following Sunday. As they rode home, Sarah fingered the edge of the wedding blanket now folded in her saddlebag. "That was more difficult than facing your entire tribe," she remarked. Swift Arrow's expression remained impassive, but his eyes held a glint of humor. "The preacher fears what he does not understand. My people merely watch and wait to understand what they fear." "And which approach do you take?" Sarah asked. Swift Arrow considered the question. "I try to understand first. Fear has poor vision." A month into their unusual marriage, Sarah awoke to find Swift Arrow already gone from his pallet in the small room adjacent to hers. The civil ceremony had made their arrangement official in the eyes of the law, but their living situation remained carefully proper. Separate rooms, separate lives joined only by common purpose. She found him at the edge of the eastern field, studying the withered corn stalks with a critical eye. The summer drought had stunted their growth, another setback in her struggle to make the ranch profitable. "The land is tired," Swift Arrow said as she approached. "It needs to rest." "Rest doesn't pay the bank," Sarah replied. He gestured toward a section of the field. "My people plant beans and squash with corn. 3 sisters growing together. The beans climb the corn stalks and return strength to the soil." Sarah considered this. Her father had always planted crops the way his father had, single fields of single plants. "You think it would work here?" "We could try a small section," he suggested. "See what grows." By midday, they had cleared and replanted a test plot using Swift Arrow's method. Sarah found herself enjoying the shared work, the easy rhythm they had developed despite their differences. As they washed up for the midday meal, Swift Arrow retrieved something from his saddlebag, a bow, smaller than the one he carried, crafted from pale wood with intricate carvings along its length. "For you," he said, offering it to her. Sarah took the bow, surprised by the gift. "I don't know how to use this." "I will teach you." His expression remained serious, but his eyes held something like eagerness. "A rifle is good for some things. A bow for others. Better to know both." That afternoon became her first lesson. Swift Arrow positioned himself behind her, adjusting her stance with light touches to her shoulders and arms. "Draw with your back, not just your arms," he instructed. "Feel the tension here." His hand rested briefly between her shoulder blades. Sarah was acutely aware of his proximity, the unfamiliar sensation of being guided by another's body. For so long, she had stood alone. Her first arrows flew wide of the target, a hay bale with a crude circle drawn upon it. By the 10th attempt, she managed to hit the outer edge. "Good," Swift Arrow nodded with approval. "You learn quickly." "My father always said I was too stubborn to fail at anything," Sarah replied, lowering the bow. "Stubbornness has its uses." A rare smile flickered across his face. "When properly directed." As the weeks passed, their days fell into a comfortable pattern. Mornings were spent on ranch work, tending animals, repairing structures, working the land. Afternoons often included Swift Arrow teaching Sarah some aspect of Apache life, hunting techniques, plant medicine, or the tracking skills that had made him a renowned warrior among his people. In return, Sarah taught him to read English better, using her father's small collection of books. His quick mind absorbed new knowledge eagerly, though he approached written words with the same careful consideration he gave to everything. "Your language puts fences around ideas," he observed one evening as they sat by the fireplace, a book open between them. "Like corralling wild horses." "And your language doesn't?" Sarah asked. "Our words flow like water, changing with the speaker and listener." He touched the page thoughtfully. "But there is power in these marks that hold thoughts still for others to find later." Their evenings often ended with such philosophical exchanges. Sarah found herself looking forward to these conversations, the quiet sharing of perspectives that had shaped their separate worlds. One morning, Sarah discovered Swift Arrow examining her father's ledgers with a perplexed expression. "These numbers," he said, pointing to the columns of debts and income. "They do not balance." Sarah sighed. "That's been the problem since my father died. More going out than coming in." Swift Arrow studied the figures. "The cattle bring little profit? Prices have been low. Everyone's struggling. But the horses, they would bring much gold?" Sarah nodded reluctantly. "Enough to clear the debt. But then nothing left to rebuild with." He considered this problem with the same intensity he brought to tracking game. "There is another way," he said finally. "Your horses are known for their quality. Others would pay to have their maras bred with your stallion." The suggestion was so practical, so obvious once stated, that Sarah wondered why she hadn't thought of it herself. A breeding fee instead of selling outright. Smaller gold now, but gold that continues. Swift Arrow nodded. "And the bloodline stays here as you wish." As their first season together progressed, Sarah noticed small changes in herself. She stood differently, moved with more confidence. The bow Swift Arrow had given her became an extension of herself during their practice sessions. She had hit the center of the target 3 times yesterday, earning a nod of genuine respect from her teacher. And somewhere along the way, she had stopped thinking of Swift Arrow as her arrangement, her compromise. He had become her partner. The autumn cattle auction brought Sarah and Swift Arrow to town together for the first time since their civil ceremony. Heads turned as they rode side by side down the main street, whispers following in their wake. Sarah kept her chin high, though she felt the weight of disapproving stares. At the auction grounds, Swift Arrow helped unload their small herd while Sarah registered their lot. The cattle weren't many, but they looked healthier than most, the result of Swift Arrow's knowledge of hidden grazing areas that had remained green despite the drought. Mrs. Matthews. Thomas Burke approached as she finished the paperwork, deliberately ignoring her legal married name. I see your situation continues. Mr. Burke. Sarah nodded coolly. Yes, my husband and I are doing quite well. Thomas lowered his voice. My father asked me to remind you that your note comes due next month. We're aware, Sarah replied, maintaining her composure despite the twist of anxiety in her stomach. Even with their improved methods, they were still short of the full payment. After Thomas departed with a final meaningful glance, Sarah joined Swift Arrow at the corral. Burke reminds us the bank note is due soon, she murmured. Swift Arrow nodded once. The cattle will bring some gold. The horse breeding as well. Perhaps enough. Perhaps. Sarah wasn't convinced, but his steady presence beside her kept panic at bay. They were preparing to leave town when the sheriff approached, an envelope in hand. Mrs. Matthews, or whatever name you're using now, this came for you. Sarah opened the letter while Swift Arrow secured their supplies. Her face paled as she read. What is it? Swift Arrow asked when he returned. She handed him the threatening letter. It seems we have more enemies than just the bank. The letter was unsigned but clear. Injuns and their white squaws don't belong on good Christian land. Sell to Henderson or suffer the consequences. Swift Arrow's expression hardened as he read, but his voice remained calm. Have there been others? No, Sarah replied. But Henderson offered to buy the ranch again last week, for even less than before. The ride home was tense with unspoken concerns. As they crested the final hill overlooking the ranch, Swift Arrow suddenly raised his hand in warning. Something is wrong. Sarah followed his gaze and saw it, a thin wisp of smoke rising from where the small barn stood. They rode hard down the slope. The barn door hung askew, black scorch marks around its frame. Inside, a pile of hay had been set ablaze, though the fire had died out before spreading to the wooden structure. A warning, Swift Arrow said, examining the scene with narrowed eyes. Meant to frighten, not destroy. Yet, that night, they took turns standing watch. During her shift, Sarah sat on the porch with her father's rifle across her lap, scanning the darkness for any sign of movement. The threatening letter lay on the table beside her, its crude message a reminder of the hatred they faced. Swift Arrow emerged from the house to join her, though his watch wasn't due to start for another hour. You should rest, she told him. Sleep will not come, he replied, settling beside her on the porch step. They sat in companionable silence for a while, the night sounds of the ranch washing over them. When I was a boy, Swift Arrow said finally, my father told me that a warrior must know which battles to fight and which to avoid. Sarah glanced at him. And which is this? This is not a battle to avoid. His voice was quiet but firm. This is our home. Our home. The words settled between them, significant in their simplicity. My people have lost much land, he continued. Each time, we were told the next place would be ours to keep. Each time, it was a lie. Sarah thought of her own struggle to hold onto her father's legacy. So we fight. We fight, he agreed. But wisely. The next morning brought another visitor, Martin Henderson himself, his manner falsely sympathetic. Heard you had some trouble, he said, eyeing the damaged barn. Terrible thing. Never know what might happen to a place without proper protection. We have protection, Sarah replied, acutely aware of Swift Arrow watching from the corral. Henderson snorted. One Injun against whoever's got it in for you? Poor odds, Mrs. Matthews. The name is Matthew's Arrow now, she corrected, the hyphenated name coming to her suddenly, a bridge between their separate identities. Whatever you call yourself, my offer still stands. Getting lower though, what with the damage and all. Henderson's smile didn't reach his eyes. Banknotes coming due, isn't it? Shame to lose everything over pride. After he'd gone, Sarah found Swift Arrow repairing the barn door, his movements precise and controlled. Henderson thinks we'll give up, she said. Swift Arrow continued working, his hands never pausing. Men like him believe all spirits can be broken. It is why they fear those who prove otherwise. Sarah picked up a hammer, joining him in the repairs. Then we'll have to prove otherwise. That evening, Swift Arrow rode to his tribe's encampment to inform them of the situation. When he returned, he carried news. 2 young warriors would help patrol their boundaries for the next moon cycle. My people understand defending one's home, he explained. This land is now part of our circle of protection. Sarah felt an unexpected warmth at this extension of tribal connection to include her ranch, their home, as Swift Arrow had called it. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The first snow came early that year, blanketing the ranch in pristine white that concealed the scars of recent troubles. Sarah stood at the window, watching fat flakes spiral down from a leaden sky. Their cattle had fetched a fair price at auction, and 3 neighboring ranchers had paid to have their mares bred with midnight. The banknote was secure for another season, though with little to spare. Storm will last 3 days, Swift Arrow said, joining her at the window. In the months of their marriage, he had gradually moved from the small side room to sharing the main living space, though they maintained their separate sleeping areas. How can you tell? Sarah asked. The birds were flying low yesterday. The deer moved to the sheltered valleys. He nodded toward the heavy clouds. And that color means snow that stays. Sarah had learned to trust his weather predictions, just as she had come to rely on his knowledge of the land. We should check the roof repairs before it gets worse. They worked together to secure the ranch for the coming storm, moving firewood closer to the house and ensuring the animals had proper shelter. By nightfall, the snow was falling so thickly that the barn was barely visible from the house. Inside, Sarah stoked the fire while Swift Arrow hung his snow-covered coat by the door. The domestic scene struck her suddenly, how natural it felt now to share this space, to move around each other with comfortable familiarity. When had that happened? As the storm intensified, the temperature plummeted. Sarah retrieved extra blankets from the cedar chest, including a patchwork quilt her mother had started and she had finished during her father's final illness. The quilt was a hodgepodge of fabrics, pieces of her father's old shirts, scraps from her childhood dresses, even a square from her mother's wedding gown. Swift Arrow watched as she spread the quilt over her bed. It tells a story, he observed. My mother believed every quilt should, Sarah replied, smoothing the colorful squares. Each piece is a memory. That night, the wind howled around the eaves, finding every crack and crevice in the old ranch house. Sarah added wood to the fire, but still the cold crept in. In her room, she piled every available blanket on her bed, but sleep remained elusive as she shivered beneath the layers. A soft knock on her door startled her. Swift Arrow stood in the doorway, a fur robe in his arms. The cold is too strong tonight, he said simply, offering the robe. This will help. Sarah accepted the gift gratefully, adding it to her bed. Still, the cold persisted. Thank you, she said, hesitating before adding, it's probably warmer by the fire. They ended up sitting on opposite sides of the hearth, wrapped in blankets, the patchwork quilt spread across both their laps. For the first time, Swift Arrow spoke at length about his childhood, his Mexican mother's capture during a raid, her eventual acceptance by the tribe, his father's pride and high expectations. He wanted me to be fully Apache, Swift Arrow said, gazing into the flames. But the tribe always saw my difference. Sarah understood something of being caught between worlds. And your mother? She taught me to see with 2 sets of eyes. His voice softened with memory. To find strength in being apart. As the night deepened and the fire burned low, their conversation wandered to shared dreams and private fears. Swift Arrow described the sacred mountain where he had received his warrior name during a vision quest. Sarah confessed her terror in the weeks after her father's death, alone with responsibilities she wasn't sure she could bear. Yet you did bear them, Swift Arrow noted. That is courage. Not courage, Sarah disagreed. Necessity. Often they are the same. When Sarah began to nod off, Swift Arrow quietly suggested they should sleep. Drowsy and comfortable for the first time that night, she didn't immediately move. Without discussion, they arranged themselves on opposite ends of the hearth, the patchwork quilt and several blankets between them. Before drifting to sleep, Sarah noticed something about the quilt in the dying firelight. One of Swift Arrow's worn shirts had been cut and added to the pattern edge, his contribution to the family history sewn into fabric. She couldn't remember doing it, yet there it was, as if it had always belonged. The storm lasted 4 days, not 3, sealing them inside the ranch house in a world suddenly narrowed to a single room, a shared fire, and the stories they told to fill the hours. They emerged from that time changed in ways neither could articulate, their cautious partnership deepened by shared confidences and the simple intimacy of survival. On the 5th morning, when the sun finally broke through and glittered across the snow-covered landscape, Sarah realized she had slept through the night with her back pressed against Swift Arrow's, the patchwork quilt, now truly a record of their joined lives, wrapped around them both. Spring arrived with a rush of green that transformed the ranch. The eastern field, replanted using Swift Arrow's Three Sisters method, sprouted with promising vigor. The cattle grew fat on new grass, and the horses thrived under their combined care. Sarah stood at the corral watching Willow, her gray mare, who was heavy with foal. "It shouldn't be much longer," she said as Swift Arrow joined her. "Before the full moon," he agreed, his shoulder brushing against hers as they leaned on the fence. Such casual contact had become commonplace between them since the winter storm. Small touches, a hand at the small of her back, fingers brushing while passing tools, shoulders pressed together by the evening fire. Nothing was spoken of these changes, yet both were acutely aware of them. 3 neighboring ranchers had already arranged for breeding rights with Midnight for the spring season. Swift Arrow's idea had proven profitable, bringing in steady income without sacrificing the horses themselves. Sarah had been meticulous in recording the bloodlines, creating a studbook that would ensure the value of future generations. "I've been thinking," Sarah said, "we should expand the breeding program. Not just Midnight, but Tempest too. And Willow's foal, if it's a colt." Swift Arrow nodded thoughtfully. "Your father would be proud. You have built something lasting." "We have," she corrected, glancing at him. Their eyes met briefly before Swift Arrow looked away, scanning the horizon with his habitual vigilance. Since the threats had begun, he never fully relaxed when they were outside the house. "The Hendersons have been quiet," Sarah noted. "Too quiet," Swift Arrow replied. "Men like that do not surrender easily." A rider approached from the direction of town, Reverend Wilson's young assistant, bringing mail and news as he did once a month. The youth's discomfort was evident as he handed Sarah a letter, his eyes darting nervously to Swift Arrow. "The Reverend asked me to tell you there's been talk," he said in a rush. "Army patrols have increased near the reservation. There was trouble at the Foster Ranch, stock missing, blame falling on renegade Apaches." Swift Arrow's expression remained impassive, but Sarah felt him tense beside her. "Was anyone hurt?" she asked. The boy shook his head. "Just cattle gone. But folks are nervous, ma'am." After he'd ridden away, Swift Arrow turned to Sarah. "I should check with my people. Such accusations often precede violence." "We'll go together," Sarah decided, surprising herself with how protective she suddenly felt toward his tribe, her extended family now, in a way. At the Apache encampment, they found the atmosphere subdued but dignified. Cloud Dancer greeted them with grave courtesy, confirming that Army patrols had increased but denying any tribal involvement in the missing cattle. "Young men from the northern band passed through," the elder explained. "They speak of reservation life with bitterness. Perhaps they took what they felt owed to them." Swift Arrow conferred with the tribal council while Sarah sat with the women, who had gradually accepted her presence over the months. She watched children playing nearby, struck by their resilience in the face of constant threat. One woman worked on a cradle board, decorating it with intricate beadwork. "For my daughter's child," she explained, noticing Sarah's interest. "A new life comes soon." Sarah's hand unconsciously moved to her own flat stomach. She had never given much thought to children. Survival had always been her primary concern. Now, watching the Apache women with their families, something stirred within her that she couldn't quite name. As they prepared to leave, Cloud Dancer presented Sarah with a small carved horse. "For the new foal," he said with a knowing smile. "Life continues, even in difficult times." On the ride home, Swift Arrow was unusually quiet. When they crested the hill overlooking their ranch, he reined in his horse. "My people may need to move again soon," he said finally. "If the army grows more aggressive." Sarah felt a cold weight settle in her chest. "And you? Would you go with them?" The question hung between them, heavy with implications neither had fully acknowledged. Before he could answer, Sarah's gaze fixed on something in the valley below. "Look, Willow." The mare had separated herself from the other horses and was lying down in the sheltered corner of the corral. They rode quickly down the slope, arriving just as Willow began to labor in earnest. Through the afternoon and into evening, they stayed with the mare, offering quiet encouragement as nature took its course. Swift Arrow's knowledge of horses proved invaluable when the foal briefly struggled, his calm hands guiding the newborn into the world. As the stars appeared overhead, a wobbly-legged colt stood for the first time, nickering softly to its mother. The foal was primarily gray like Willow, but with a distinctive dark mane and tail that echoed Midnight's coloring. "He is strong," Swift Arrow observed, genuine pleasure in his voice. "A good beginning." Sarah leaned against him without thinking, his arm coming around her shoulders in a natural embrace. "A new life," she murmured, echoing Cloud Dancer's words. In that moment, watching new life emerge under a canopy of stars, the ranch felt truly like their home, a place they had created together, where future possibilities stretched before them as boundless as the night sky. The summer's sun beat down mercilessly as Sarah worked to repair the irrigation ditch that fed their vegetable garden. Swift Arrow had ridden to town for supplies, leaving her to tackle the day's chores alone. She didn't mind. There was satisfaction in physical labor, in seeing immediate results from her efforts. A loose stone gave way beneath her boot, sending her tumbling down the rocky embankment. Pain shot through her ankle as she landed awkwardly at the bottom. Sarah bit back a cry, taking stock of her injuries. The ankle was already swelling, and blood trickled from a gash on her forearm. She tried to stand, only to collapse when her ankle refused to bear weight. The house stood a quarter-mile away across open ground, with no shade between. The June sun would make crawling that distance an exercise in torture. For nearly an hour, Sarah dragged herself toward the house, progress agonizingly slow. Sweat soaked her clothing, and dizziness from pain and heat made the world tilt alarmingly. When black spots began dancing at the edges of her vision, she forced herself to stop and rest in a small patch of shade from a scrubby juniper. That was where Swift Arrow found her, his horse's gallop stirring dust as he returned from town earlier than expected. Without a word, he dismounted and knelt beside her, his hands gentle as they assessed her injuries. "The ankle is not broken," he pronounced after careful examination. "But badly twisted. The cut needs cleaning." He lifted her as if she weighed nothing, cradling her against his chest as he carried her to the house. Sarah found herself acutely aware of his heartbeat beneath her cheek, the strength in his arms, the clean scent of sage that always seemed to cling to his skin. Inside, Swift Arrow tended her injuries with practiced skill. He cleaned the gash with a mixture of water and whiskey that made Sarah hiss through clenched teeth, then applied a poultice of herbs he'd gathered early that morning. "This will draw out infection," he explained, binding the poultice with a clean cloth. "And ease the pain." For her ankle, he created a paste from willow bark and wrapped it tightly with strips of linen. "Keep it raised," he instructed. "No walking for 3 days." Sarah frowned. 3 days? There's too much work." "The work will wait," he interrupted firmly. "Healing will not." That night, Swift Arrow slept on the floor beside her bed, waking whenever she stirred to offer water or adjust her pillows. By morning, the herb poultice had reduced the angry redness around her cut, though her ankle remained painfully swollen. True to his word, Swift Arrow managed the ranch alone for the next 3 days, returning regularly to check on her and prepare meals. Sarah chafed at the enforced idleness but found unexpected pleasure in watching him move about the house, his presence filling spaces she hadn't realized were empty. On the 4th evening, fever struck without warning. One moment Sarah was comfortably reading by lamplight. The next, she was shivering violently despite the summer heat. Swift Arrow placed a cool cloth on her forehead, his expression grave as he examined her arm. The cut had healed cleanly, but red streaks now extended from it, blood poisoning taking hold despite their precautions. Through the night, Swift Arrow battled her fever with damp cloths and herbal teas. Sarah drifted in and out of consciousness, aware sometimes of his voice speaking softly in Apache, other times of his hand holding hers as if it were an anchor in a storm. In her delirium, Sarah spoke of things long buried, her fear of being alone, her grief for her father, her doubts about her ability to preserve his legacy. And somehow, most revealing of all, her growing feelings for the man who had entered her life as an adversary and become something else entirely. "You should have taken the horses," she murmured during one feverish moment. "It would have been simpler." "Not simpler," Swift Arrow replied, though she wasn't sure if he was really there or a figment of her fever dreams. "Just emptier." Dawn broke on the 2nd day with Sarah's fever finally breaking. She awoke to find Swift Arrow asleep in a chair beside her bed, his normally vigilant posture softened in exhaustion. On the small table beside him lay a piece of paper covered with charcoal marks, a drawing, she realized as her vision cleared. It was her face, rendered with surprising artistry. Not as she looked now, ill and depleted, but as she appeared in stronger moments, eyes bright with determination, the curve of her mouth suggesting imminent laughter. He had captured something essential about her, something she herself sometimes forgot existed. This was how he saw her. The realization sent a different kind of warmth flooding through her, one that had nothing to do with fever. Swift Arrow stirred, immediately alert when he saw her watching him. "The fever has broken," he said, relief evident in his voice as he touched her forehead. "You drew me," Sarah said, nodding toward the sketch. A rare flash of uncertainty crossed his face. "It helps to focus the mind when keeping watch." "Is that how you see me?" she asked softly. His eyes met hers, direct and unguarded for perhaps the first time. "I see you as you are. Unbreakable." In that moment, something shifted between them, a final barrier dissolving like morning mist under the sun's warmth. Sarah reached for his hand, and Swift Arrow entwined his fingers with hers, the simple gesture more intimate than any words. The autumn harvest brought abundance to the Matthews Arrow Ranch. Their experimental field yielded twice the crop of previous years, and the horse breeding program had established a solid reputation among neighboring ranches. For the first time since her father's death, Sarah felt secure in their financial position. Their personal relationship had evolved as well. Swift Arrow now slept in her room, though they maintained a modest privacy that felt right for both. Their conversations had deepened, touches lingered, and a new kind of partnership had emerged, one built on growing affection as much as practical need. Sarah had just finished storing preserves in the cellar when she spotted a rider approaching, the sheriff's deputy, looking grim as he dismounted. "Mrs. Matthews Arrow," he nodded stiffly, clearly uncomfortable with her adopted name. "Got a military notice for you and him." He handed her an official-looking document, its Army seal prominent. "What's this about?" Sarah asked, though dread pooled in her stomach. "Army's got new orders about Apache movements," the deputy replied. "Your husband should read it careful-like." He paused before adding, "Tensions are high. Soldier patrol was ambushed last week near Whitewater Creek. 2 men killed." After the deputy departed, Sarah studied the notice with growing alarm. Swift Arrow appeared from the barn, immediately alert to her distress. "What has happened?" he asked. She handed him the military notice. "The Army is restricting Apache movement. Any tribal members found more than 5 miles from the reservation boundary without written permission will be considered hostile." Swift Arrow read the document carefully, his expression unchanged, though Sarah had learned to recognize the subtle tightening around his eyes that signaled deep concern. "There is more," he said. "The tribal families must report to the agency headquarters for a count every week. Those who fail to appear will be pursued." That evening, they sat on the porch as darkness gathered, the military notice lying between them like a physical barrier. "This will destroy my people's way of life," Swift Arrow said finally. "The hunting grounds they need lie beyond this 5-mile boundary. The best plants for medicine, the sacred sites for ceremonies, all now forbidden without a paper from a white officer who will rarely grant it." Sarah took his hand, feeling the calluses that matched her own. "What about you? You're married to me, living here legally. The notice makes no exception for marriage. In their eyes, I am Apache first." His fingers tightened around hers. "And there are rumors that some want all Apaches moved to reservations farther north, away from their ancestral lands completely." They were still discussing options when Hoofbeats announced another visitor. Sarah was surprised to see Thomas Burke riding toward the house long after business hours. "Evening," Burke called, his usual arrogance tempered by what appeared to be genuine concern. "Thought you should know there's trouble brewing in town." "What kind of trouble?" Sarah asked. "Meeting at the saloon. Henderson and his bunch working folks up about the Apache threat. Talking about forming a committee for local protection." Burke's gaze shifted to Swift Arrow. "Not everyone agrees with them, but after that army patrol was attacked." "My tribe had no part in any attack," Swift Arrow stated. Burke shrugged. "Folks aren't much for distinctions these days. Just thought you should be warned." After he'd gone, Sarah and Swift Arrow retreated inside, securing doors and windows with greater care than usual. "Henderson will use this to pressure us about the land," Sarah said. Swift Arrow nodded. "And to drive a wedge between us." "That won't happen," she replied fiercely, taking his face between her hands. "Whatever comes, we face it together." His eyes held hers for a long moment before he bent to kiss her, a gesture still new enough to send warmth flooding through her. The following week brought more disturbing news. 2 Apache families had been forced from their homes by masked riders. A young tribesman had been beaten in town for suspicious behavior. Swift Arrow grew increasingly tense, divided between his commitment to Sarah and the ranch and his concern for his people. The breaking point came when Cloud Dancer arrived one evening, his usual dignity marred by exhaustion. He spoke with Swift Arrow in rapid Apache, their conversation intense. "What is it?" Sarah asked when they finished. "The army commander has ordered all Apache men to surrender their weapons," Swift Arrow translated. "Those who refuse will be arrested. The tribal council is gathering to decide how to respond." Sarah understood immediately. "You need to be there." He nodded, conflict evident in his eyes. "I do not wish to leave you unprotected." "I'm hardly helpless," she reminded him, touching the bow he had given her, which now hung beside the rifle over the fireplace. "And this is your people's survival." That night, as Swift Arrow prepared to leave at dawn, Sarah found him studying a small leather pouch. Inside was a single eagle feather, a messenger's token. "If the council decides to resist," he explained, "this will be sent to all Apache men asking them to return to the tribe's defense." "And if that message comes?" Sarah asked, though she already knew the answer. Swift Arrow met her gaze directly. "Then I must answer." Sarah nodded, throat tight with unspoken fears. She had always known this day might come, when the worlds they had tried to bridge would force them to choose. Later, as they lay together in the darkness, Sarah pressed closer to his warmth, memorizing the feel of him beside her. Whatever tomorrow brought, tonight they still had this, their hard-won connection, their shared home, their improbable love that had grown from the most barren of beginnings. Swift Arrow had been gone for 3 days when Sarah spotted riders approaching from the direction of town. She recognized Martin Henderson and his sons, accompanied by several men she knew only by sight, local ranchers and miners whose faces had twisted with disapproval whenever she appeared in town with her Apache husband. Sarah reached for her rifle, checking that it was loaded before stepping onto the porch. Midnight and the other horses moved restlessly in the corral, sensing her tension. "Mrs. Matthews?" Henderson called, deliberately omitting the second half of her married name. "Word is your Indian's run back to his tribe." "Wise choice, leaving while he could." "My husband is attending tribal business," Sarah replied evenly. "He'll return shortly." The elder Henderson's son spat tobacco juice into the dirt. "Tribal business? That what they call plannin' raids now?" "State your purpose or leave my property," Sarah said, her grip tightening on the rifle. Henderson gestured expansively. "Just being neighborly. Times are dangerous for a woman alone, especially one known to harbor Apache sympathies." The threat hung in the air, thinly veiled. Sarah raised her rifle slightly. "I'm not alone. And I'm perfectly capable of protecting what's mine." The standoff stretched for several tense moments before Henderson shrugged. "Offer still stands. My previous price for your land, though I can't guarantee for how long." After they departed, Sarah leaned against the porch post, heart racing despite her outward calm. The encounter confirmed what she had feared. With Swift Arrow gone, those who coveted her land felt emboldened to press their advantage. That evening, a different visitor arrived. A young Apache boy no more than 12, riding bareback on a pony that had clearly traveled hard. He slid from his mount and approached Sarah with the solemn dignity of a much older messenger. "From Swift Arrow," he said in halting English, presenting her with a small bundle wrapped in hide. Inside, Sarah found a single eagle feather identical to the one Swift Arrow had shown her. Her heart sank as she understood its meaning. The tribal council had decided to resist the army's demands. All Apache warriors were being called to stand with their people. "He comes?" she asked the boy. The young messenger shook his head. "He sends this." He handed her a folded piece of paper, a rarity among the primarily oral Apache. Swift Arrow's careful handwriting filled the page. "The tribe moves to the high canyon for protection. Many warriors go to fight. I have told them I must return to you first. Wait 3 days. If I do not come, it means I cannot." Sarah read the message twice, hearing his voice in every carefully chosen word. He was torn between 2 loyalties, 2 homes, 2 loves. She thought of the ranch they had built together, the life they had forged from an impossible beginning. Could she ask him to abandon his people in their hour of need? Would she even be the woman he had grown to love if she did? The boy accepted water and food before departing, his young face grave with the responsibility of his mission. Sarah watched him disappear into the gathering dusk, Swift Arrow's eagle feather clutched in her hand. For 2 days, Sarah continued the ranch work alone, her body moving through familiar tasks while her mind wrestled with impossible choices. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, a familiar figure appeared on the horizon, Swift Arrow, returning as promised. Their reunion was wordless at first, his arms enfolding her in an embrace that spoke more than language could convey. When they finally moved inside, Swift Arrow placed his weapons on the table with deliberate care. "My people prepare for war," he said simply. "The army commander refuses to listen. The young men have already fought skirmishes with soldier patrols." "And they've called for you," Sarah said, placing the eagle feather beside his knife. He nodded once. "I am still counted among their warriors. My skills as a scout would serve them well." "You must go," Sarah said, the words tearing from her throat despite her desire to beg him to stay. Swift Arrow studied her face. "If I go, I may not return. The army will not distinguish between different Apache bands. All will be enemies." "And if you stay?" Sarah asked, though she already knew the answer. "I will live with the knowledge that I abandoned my people when they needed me most." His eyes, usually so controlled, revealed his torment. "Either choice carries a price I am not certain I can bear." Sarah touched his face, memorizing the contours she had come to love. "What does your heart tell you?" "That I have found something here I never expected," he replied, his voice rough with emotion. "A home. A partner. A future I want more than I have wanted anything." "Then stay," she whispered, "and watch from safety while my mother's people, my father's legacy, are destroyed?" The anguish in his voice cut through her. Could you love a man who would make such a choice? The question struck at the heart of who they were, separately and together. Sarah thought of her own fierce determination to honor her father's legacy, to protect what was hers. Would she not fight with equal dedication for her own people if they were threatened? No, she admitted finally. I could not. Swift Arrow pulled her close, his forehead resting against hers. Then we face an impossible choice. Dawn found them still awake, the night spent in conversations that circled the same impossible choice. As the first light touched the eastern hills, Sarah reached a decision. There's a third path, she said, watching Swift Arrow prepare his few possessions. One we haven't considered. He turned to her, curiosity in his tired eyes. You go to your people, Sarah continued, not to fight, but to negotiate. You speak English better than most Apache. You understand both worlds. You could act as intermediary between the tribe and the army. Swift Arrow considered her words. The army commander may not listen. He sees all Apache as enemies now. Then go higher, Sarah insisted. The territorial governor respects my father's name. I have letters from him that might secure you a meeting. Hope flickered briefly in Swift Arrow's expression before doubt returned. My people may see negotiation as weakness. The young warriors especially are eager for battle. And how many will survive such a battle? Sarah challenged. Against army rifles and cannons? The truth of her words hung between them. Swift Arrow had seen enough warfare to know its cost, especially for those outmatched in weapons and numbers. I will try, he agreed finally. But the journey is dangerous. If I am captured wearing Apache clothing, carrying weapons? Sarah nodded grimly. Then go as both Apache and settler. Take my father's horse and saddle. Wear the clothes he gave you. Carry his letters and our marriage certificate. They prepared swiftly, gathering documents that might lend credibility to his mission. Sarah packed food and medicines while Swift Arrow wrote a careful message to Cloud Dancer explaining his plan. When all was ready, Sarah handed him her father's shirt, the one he had worn when ill with the arrow wound that had first connected him to Swift Arrow. For luck, she said softly. Swift Arrow changed into the white man's clothing, the unfamiliar cut making him look somehow more vulnerable. Yet his bearing remained that of a warrior, straight-backed and dignified. 3 weeks, he told her. If I have not returned by then, I'll come looking for you, Sarah interrupted, refusing to consider darker possibilities. Their parting kiss held the desperation of those who know the future hangs by a thread. Then he was gone, riding east toward the territorial capital rather than west to the Apache stronghold, embarking on a mission that might save both worlds they loved, or cost him everything. The first week of separation passed in anxious activity. Sarah threw herself into ranch work, exhausting her body to quiet her mind. She reinforced doors and windows, practiced with her bow daily, and kept the rifle always within reach. On the 8th day, Henderson and his men returned. Still alone, the rancher called as Sarah met them on the porch, rifle in hand. Starting to look like your Apaches abandoned you for good. My husband is on business in the capital, Sarah replied evenly. He'll return shortly. Henderson's expression darkened. Don't lie to me, girl. Words come that the Apache are gathering for war. Every savage with any sense is joining them, including yours, I'd wager. My husband is seeking peace, Sarah insisted, unlike some who seem eager for bloodshed. Peace? Henderson laughed coldly. The only peace will come when every Apache is on a reservation or in the ground. You'd best decide which side you're on before it's too late. After they'd gone, Sarah paced the house, anxiety gnawing at her. What if Swift Arrow had been captured or killed on the road? What if the governor refused to see him? What if his own people rejected his attempts at negotiation? The second week brought rumors of skirmishes between Apache warriors and army patrols. Sarah rode to town for supplies, enduring hostile stares and whispered comments. The general store owner refused to serve her until Thomas Burke unexpectedly intervened. That's enough, Jenkins, Burke said firmly. Mrs. Matthew's money is good as anyone's. Later, as Sarah loaded her purchases, Burke approached. Any word from your husband? She shook her head. Not yet. The situation's deteriorating, Burke warned. Armies bringing in reinforcements from Fort Union. There's talk of a full campaign against the Apache holdouts. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she secured her saddlebags. My husband is trying to prevent that very outcome. Burke looked skeptical but nodded. For your sake, I hope he succeeds. But you should prepare for the possibility that he won't return. The third week began with a thunderstorm that matched Sarah's darkening mood. Still no word from Swift Arrow. The promised 3 weeks would end in just 4 days. On the 18th day of his absence, Sarah found Swift Arrow's shirt, the one he'd worn the day he left, hanging by the door. She pressed it to her face, inhaling his fading scent, then folded it carefully and placed it under her pillow. That night, she slept with her hand resting on the blood-stained fabric, as if it might somehow connect her to him across the miles. The 19th day dawned clear and cool. Sarah was chopping wood when she spotted a rider approaching, not Swift Arrow, but a young army lieutenant. Her heart froze in her chest. "Mrs. Matthews Arrow?" he called, dismounting at the gate. Sarah nodded, unable to speak past the fear lodged in her throat. "I have news of your husband," the lieutenant said, his expression unreadable. "He was wounded 3 days ago while attempting to reach the governor's office." 5 years passed, transforming the Matthews Arrow Ranch into a place few would have recognized. The original house had been expanded, a new barn built, and the horse breeding program had become renowned throughout the territory. Where once stood a struggling homestead now thrived a prosperous enterprise. Sarah sat on the porch, watching as Swift Arrow demonstrated proper riding posture to their 4-year-old son, James Cloud Arrow. The boy sat proudly atop his pony, his features a perfect blend of his parents, his father's dark eyes and high cheekbones, his mother's determined chin and expressive eyebrows. The scar on Swift Arrow's left shoulder, legacy of the bullet that had nearly taken his life during his peace mission, was barely visible beneath his shirt. His journey had ended in both failure and unexpected success. Though he'd been shot by a frightened shopkeeper before reaching the governor, the incident had drawn attention to his mission. During his recovery, influential citizens had taken up his cause, eventually securing the negotiated settlement that had prevented all-out war. Not all Apache had accepted the terms. Some bands had fought on, others had surrendered to reservation life. But Swift Arrow's people, under Cloud Dancer's leadership, had secured a compromise, a smaller territory than they had once roamed, but one legally recognized and protected from further encroachment. Henderson had never forgiven them for thwarting his plans to acquire the ranch. He'd died the previous winter, bitter and alone, his sons having moved to California after selling their property to a mining company. "He's a natural," Sarah called as James executed a perfect turn on his pony. Swift Arrow nodded, pride evident in his smile. Like his mother. Their daughter, Elizabeth, not yet 2, toddled across the porch to reach for Sarah's hand. Sarah pulled the child onto her lap, breathing in the sweet scent of her dark curls. On the wall inside their home hung a family portrait, a painting commissioned on their last trip to Santa Fe. It showed the 4 of them against the backdrop of the ranch, Swift Arrow standing tall and dignified beside a seated Sarah, their children positioned between them. The artist had captured not just their likenesses but something of their spirit, the strength and determination that had forged this improbable family from the collision of 2 worlds. The portrait had become something of a local legend. Visitors to the territory would sometimes travel miles out of their way to see the ranch where an Apache warrior and a white woman had defied convention and built a life together. Some came with skepticism, others with curiosity, but most left with a new perspective on what was possible when courage overcame prejudice. Cloud Dancer, now in his final years, had blessed their children in Apache tradition, declaring them bridges between worlds that had too long been separated by misunderstanding and fear. The old man's prophecy seemed to be coming true as other mixed marriages followed theirs, gradually changing the fabric of frontier society. As twilight softened the landscape, Sarah watched Swift Arrow lift their son from the pony and set him gently on the ground. His patience as a father had surprised and moved her, though perhaps it shouldn't have. The same steadiness that had first irritated her, his calm persistence on her porch all those years ago, now anchored their family through life's storms. James ran to the porch, eager to tell his mother about his riding lesson. Swift Arrow followed more slowly, his gait still carrying a slight hitch from his old wound. "Did you see Mama? I rode like a real Apache," the boy exclaimed. "And like a real rancher," Swift Arrow added, ruffling his son's hair. "Both are in your blood." Sarah met her husband's gaze over their children's heads, a world of shared history passing between them. From adversaries to reluctant partners to lovers to parents, their journey had traversed territory more challenging than any physical landscape. "Tell us the story again," James pleaded as they settled inside for the evening meal. "About how Papa came for the horses and stayed for love." Swift Arrow glanced at Sarah, amusement crinkling the corners of his eyes. It had become a family ritual, this telling and retelling of their beginning. "Well," Sarah began, drawing both children close, "it started with a debt and a promise." As the familiar tale unfolded, Swift Arrow reached across the table to take Sarah's hand, his thumb tracing the calluses earned through years of shared labor. Outside, the 3 original horses, now aged but still proud, grazed peacefully alongside their numerous descendants. The land that had once been contested territory had become something else entirely, not his or hers, but theirs, a home built from equal parts struggle and love, a legacy stronger than blood alone. In the distance, the setting sun painted the mountains in shades of gold and purple, the same mountains that had witnessed their first confrontation all those years ago. The land endured, as did the family that had grown from the most unlikely of beginnings, an Apache warrior who came to take her horses as debt, yet offered marriage and found unbreakable love.